Welcome everybody. It's a real pleasure to see you and connect with you. And I'd like to start this this lecture session by welcoming those physically online, but also to invite us to do something that we do in Futures, which is to ask ourselves who's not in the room. And to do that physically, and to be conscious of that, and to also ask ourselves, particularly as change makers, whose voices are not represented? Whose voices, what lenses are we looking through when we come to spaces and meetings and workshops, or when we're designing solutions, and consciously or subconsciously and unconsciously not bringing those voices to the table. So it's a kind of history of behaviors that we need to be conscious of changing. So this question, who is not in the room, is a really important part of thinking about and shaping the futures that we want to create. So I'd also like to pose that question of, or slightly differently in the welcome, to say who is in the room and yet doesn't feel heard or able to be heard. And I think it's something that is really valuable when we create sessions, when we do sessions, and we are intentional about international development, to realize that culturally there are people who hold back, and to actually spend more time listening. So who's not in the room and who is in the room and doesn't feel heard yet? And I'd also like to extend the welcome and actually invite us to start to practice as change makers, especially now in an age of the geopolitical noise that is all around us, and to invite consciously every time we meet, to invite nature and more than human beings into the spaces that we're in, no matter how short the meeting or how long the workshop, to be really conscious of this reweaving of that relationship. And we have really good cause to do that. We have signals of change today which really support us in doing that, which is the Kunming-Montreal biodiversity framework, which mentions Mother Earth 8 times, and to get something like that into a UN document must have taken huge amounts of resources and determination by change makers in international development. We also have this ESG metric, which is about nature as a stakeholder. And we also have these nature governance elements in small businesses, people sitting, the voice of nature on boards. All of these are signals of change, like tangible, actual things that happen in the present, which are rolling out across futures in order to make change happen, in order to effect the changes that we're committed to in addressing, in terms of the poly crisis, in terms of rethinking the way, the impact that development has in this different landscape, or this dramatic landscape that we're in the present day. So I want you to keep that in mind, and particularly towards the end, I would love for you to share or to draw on thoughts from your culture, ancestral wisdom, about how we might invite nature in. What's a ritual or an action or a tradition that you feel brave enough to share, and perhaps we could start to include that. So that's a kind of a futures version of futures discipline, foresight, of how we start to change the future by acting differently in the way that we set and open up the sessions, the meetings, the gatherings that we're in. And there we go. So I know I'm supposed to be giving a lecture, but it's a kind of slightly different opportunity I'd like to take advantage of. And if you're listening to this after the event, this is also something to participate in. But in futures, we also, when we're thinking about the futures and the way we want to shape things going forward, there's an exercise that we often do, which is called Time Machine. And so this is going to involve you typing into the chat, so get ready. So my invitation here also is that you have woken up on this day in 2048. You've just had breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on which time zone you're in. And we are in 23 years ahead, and it's a reunion about this lecture. And I'd like to ask you, how do you want this? How do you feel? How do you feel on this day in 2048? In this world where the problems that you're in love with solving today in international development have been solved. So what does that feel like for you? How do you feel? So what I'd love you to do is type into the chat. It's going to involve me stopping sharing so that then I can see what is in the chat. Okay. So I'm waiting with bated breath. Oh, I can see typing happening, so excellent. There are no wrong answers, by the way. It's a space of imagination and creativity. But I want you to, my invitation is for you to type something, share something from the heart. So Liz says impressed and also ready for complex discussions because development happens in a participatory and asset-based way. Gorgeous. Fulfilled, relaxed and excited, a sense of pride also. That's brilliant. I'd feel reflective of what we discussed 23 years ago, satisfied that the problems I'm working on have been fixed, disheartened of how many problems have been identified, but hopeful for what comes next. Fantastic, thanks, Tom. Still got Dayan and Mazayan typing, so just wait for those. But it's a real, if I want you to kind of sit, let that settle and be really in this space of imagining, hopeful. Yes, so in 23 years' time, I dread to think, don't want to name my age in 23 years' time. But yeah, exactly. So Dayan says, hopeful, looking back at the achievements we've made would teach me that we can make further changes. Fantastic. So there's this real sense, thank you, of participation, asset, positive, you know, there's more in the credit bank than less. Reflective, looking back, satisfaction. And so that's a really wonderful way of thinking about these futures and starting to almost open the curtains in our brains as to, okay, well, I hadn't thought about that. So my next question is slightly different. It comes from this place of the more we think about embodying futures, the more we feel them, the more we sense them, taste them, hear them, smell them, we start to create this muscle memory of what those futures are. We can start to train ourselves into the possibility that they may exist. So my question now is for you to write in the chat, what would this future smell like for you? So again, you're here, we're here online. The door of your apartment is open. What would it smell like? Again, there are no wrong answers. And you can just write something in the chat. It smells like clean air, crisp air, fresh, crisp air. Yeah, pure air. Fresh cut grass. Smell like sunshine and freshly baked cookies. What flavour, Sabina? That's also an important one. Tom, clean and crisp air, like when I wake up on a frosty morning in the countryside. Yeah, so there's no air pollution. We'll go with no air pollution. And Sabina's typing away. So I had a vanilla cookies. So now we can really smell it. Delicious. And now I want one. So if anyone's got a handy drone and can fly some over, that would be amazing. So it's a real, can you feel already the sense of shift, how we're able to place ourselves into some space, into almost like a living, breathing space of the future, simply by engaging a situation and our senses. This embodiment is really, really important. And so it's important because really helping us when we're engaging our communities, when we're talking about the challenges that we want to resolve and how people experience them, helping them also to shift into solution making can be as simple as this time machine exercise. And I did this really, I did the same exercise last week with a different group of young people. And they talked about petrichor and how, the scent of the earth after rain. And they were from all different parts of the world. And that was a really special moment of also as them wondering, what does petrichor smell like in your part of India or this part of Africa or in the English countryside or in the Swiss countryside, in Brazil. And so this possibilities start to emerge within us. It starts to access our imagination and creativity, and doing that breaks down these silos of what we believe to be possible. So I hope you like that. Mine would be something along the lines of, yeah, petrichor, the earth after rain, this clear, crisp air, and also the taste, which I haven't asked you, but the taste of lemon cake, which sets my mouth alive. All right, bear with me one second. So, good job on the time machine. So now I just want to start to guide us from these futures exercises that have been opening up our imagination into some definitions. And what you've experienced is a kind of hint of this essence of what flourishing might be. This, this echo from the future of what a life lived where these problems are solved could be. And so flourishing is this concept which I'm very passionate about. It's a concept from positive psychology, developed by Martin Seligman, who's the founder of positive psychology. And really flourishing asks us, what makes a good life? What allows you to flourish? And it's around these pillars which are narrowed into this acronym PERMA: positive emotions, engagement with life, with a task, relationships, meaning, accomplishment. So everyone needs to be engaging these 6 pillars in order to live a good life, to feel a good life, to have well-being. And it's very much focused on this essence of well-being and satisfaction as opposed to happiness, because happiness is subjective. And I think really this is the essence of the problems that we're trying to solve today, are very much in reality focused on how do we help people create flourishing lives? How do we solve these problems so we, as change makers, enable our communities? And if we can figure out and explore the problems that we're facing through this lens of wanting flourishing, it enables us to perceive challenges and also want to solve them in a different way, in a way which is focused on this as the end game. So foresight, then, the other part of this equation, foresight is, and you've heard me talk already about future thinking. So foresight and future thinking are this discipline which is a professional, cultural, artistic, academic discipline that's been around for a long time. And thinking about futures is something that is not new to this discipline, but is this professionalized discipline that, with methodologies that we follow, is all around enabling us to systematically and systemically imagine and explore alternative possible futures. And by doing that, we're able to explore and really dig deep into the fact that the future is not predictable, and move away from that kind of narrowing that we feel, especially in the age that we're in, with all the data that it's kind of always at us, in order to be able to take this breath and in order to explore these futures so that we can challenge these assumptions, we can challenge these blind spots, to realize that we have them, these biases, and to unweave these old and toxic and tired narratives and beliefs which are generating these problems of inequality. These narratives that keep talking about, well, if we go back to this, if we use fossil fuels, etc., it's about a myth of safety, when in fact where we need to be to solve the problems and how we're trying to tackle them through international development is really being in a place of transcending these silos of thinking and being and behaving. When we step into the futures, when we really take on board that the future is not predictable and that there are many alternatives, it allows us to dig deep and then come back into the present with new perspectives, with new attitudes, with different beliefs, with different narratives, so that we can create more choices, make different decisions, and choose other pathways in order to turn those descriptions, those visions, into something that is real and tangible. And so and it allows us to stay agile in getting there. So foresight is about the futures. Foresight for flourishing is about exploring those futures so we can really see how we might design in the present to enable people to live good lives, to live well, to have well-being. And if you, the center of flourishing, if you remember the PERMA acronym, it's all about this relationship. Relationships sit in the center of flourishing. And what we mean by that is this relationship with places. That means us, the relationship we have as us with ourselves, our relationship with others, humans, and more than human beings, as well as communities. So it really transcends geographical location and is more this sense of community can be anywhere and with anybody. And in doing that, in building this connection, reconnection with place and places, it links us deeply to the first regenerative principle, which is all about the story of place. What is our story of place? What are the narratives that we have? And how, therefore, when we use foresight and reimagine those stories of place and places, those relationships, how might we change things? How might we bring new narratives and new beliefs and new hope to possibility? So it's this very act of imagining using foresight that really enables us to step out of ourselves and step into new possibilities, step into new imaginings that give us the courage, I suppose, give us the hope that we can bring different and new possibilities to the way that we do things. So, yeah, before I go to that one, I'll stop sharing a minute and come back to you. So there's more stuff to do. I think, and I'd love to know from you, how do you feel, what phrases do you use currently about why you do what you do? Why are you studying, or why are you involved in international development? When you talk about the outcome, or you talk about the future, what phrases do you use? Again, this is something you can type in the chat. So an example being, certainly when I started out, I would use the phrase, I want to create better futures. And even now I'll slip into better futures. So that's the kind of phraseology that I'm looking for. Again, there's no wrong answers. So what words do we attach to the future? Or what words are you attaching to futures currently? Positive change. Great, thank you. Okay, I use better futures too, and better possible futures, and nudging change. Yeah, a more equitable world. Yeah, an environmentally stable future that enables people and creatures to live well. Yeah, inclusivity. Absolutely. So these are all fantastic words that we use, and so we're in this. I think we're in this really gorgeous space of timing when there's possibilities for practitioners, professionals within international development can continue to use these words, but then also use futures and foresight to start to really put descriptions out there. What does it mean to be in a better future? And because words are magic, and when we're feeling overwhelmed, as many of us are, given the extent of change, the speed of change that is happening around us, it's really valuable to use deeper descriptions. And I just want to come back to that. The overwhelm, many things can be true at once. The overwhelm that we feel as change makers is real and valid. We are driven by this innate passion and purpose to make change happen, to solve the problems that are around us, to create equitable futures. And at the same time, you know, we're also experiencing climate grief. We are feeling fear. We're feeling this erosion of equalities very deeply. And we have this distraction economy, which is bombarding us as well. And so it is easy to feel changemaker guilt as well. But the reality is, and that's the beauty of practicing foresight for flourishing, is the more you use your imagination, the more you use your creativity, the more you deliberately choose to ground yourself and others in this space of imagination, is that if you're burnt out, you're not able as a change maker to continue to make change. And so when you use your imagination, it kind of alchemizes this fear, this grief, this overwhelm into something different, into the possibilities that are there. It opens up the opportunity to see things differently and to have different conversations and to navigate conflict in a different way. And so if there's one thing that you practice every day, my invitation is that it is this deliberate practicing of imagination and creativity, because it generates positive emotions. Imagination generates hope. It generates joy. It generates gratitude. And these are actually flourishing elements in action for you. And when you are doing those things, you are unlocking your creativity, you're unlocking your problem solving, you're unlocking your resilience in order to do things differently. So I think there's also this this element of really exploring the future of international development, this from a different way. And I suppose the question of kind of linking those two things or the possibilities is, well, what might these futures look like? Let's assume that we have done everything we can in the present and we've actually put ourselves out of business. International development, the office is closed, the sign's up, because we've solved all the problems. And I'm just wondering, and I'd love to get some feedback, what would it feel like if we renamed ourselves, because words are magic, and imagining futures opens up all sorts of possibilities? What if we, by 2048, we were talking about the future of international flourishing, no longer talking about international development, but international flourishing? How do you feel about that? What does it feel good? You can write something in the chat. How would it feel to stretch what seems impossible to the point of the edge of reality and say that we've done our job, now we're focused on international flourishing? Is he typing? Just going on. So again, there are no wrong answers. My invitation is that you suspend your disbelief and almost treat it as a, what's this deep story of our future selves that we can imagine creating? It takes some, it's a bit of a mind shift, isn't it? So exciting. Thanks, Liz. It opens more possibilities for what's good. I've been thinking that development would be replaced with listening, but flourishing is better. Yeah, Tom, a really valid point. If you understand the definition of flourishing, it could, and I imagine it could prompt interesting actions that go beyond the today, but the interpretation could mean different things to others that could go against our agenda. So I think you've got a, that's also an incredibly valid point. What we've seen in the present moment is the hijacking by the far right of the term common sense. Whereas across my career, the term "let's apply our common sense" has been used in international development. It's been used by changemakers to create fairness and justice and inequality and equality, address inequality. And now the far right has kind of hijacked it for their own ends, and which in fact promotes inequality at a humongous scale. So I think that's absolutely super interesting. And so we always have to be, thinking of checking ourselves and checking that the people around us are understanding what we mean. Good point. So Dayan, I like the word flourishing. It feels more inclusive and indicates co-creation of possible futures. Yeah, brilliant. So you see how different perspectives create different possibilities. So I'm going to go back to the slides a second. And I want to focus down this foresight for flourishing, this power that it has on for us as change makers to be clear in our definitions as they evolve, to look through this lens of building relationships with places so people can live good lives. And I think the phrase just transition, the just part of transition, is so important in international development. And how you fit into all of this. So my invitation is also for you as change makers, as professionals, students, professionals involved in international development, working towards international flourishing with a different set of problems or challenges that might bring. But I want you to recognize yourself as what we call a signal of change. So a signal of change in foresight and flourishing, foresight and futures, is a definite, tangible, real, and vivid event in the timeline of the planet. We often talk about signals as external things, and I'm going to come back to those in a minute. But the challenge of the path, the purpose that we are inspired by to be involved in international development is purpose-driven, it's passion-driven. It's not the easiest of paths. It is one that requires us to be resilient and navigate challenges, but it comes with deep fulfillment. But you, as a signal of change, are a definite, tangible, real, and vivid event in the timeline of the planet. And that's a powerful thing to ground yourself in on a daily, hourly, minute-by-minute basis when you take on these wicked problems to solve. And there's something very exquisite about realizing that the actions that you take in the present are capable of unfolding different possible futures, desired futures, flourishing futures. So I want you to also really ground yourself in that and really thinking of yourself as this signal transmitting waves of change into the future. So a metaphor could be you're like a pebble being dropped in a pond, and you can, all of those ripples across the surface. You're like a radio wave transmitting across time and space, like a match, a light being lit in darkness. It can be seen miles and miles away. So you're not just any signal of change, but one also that has this capacity, this passion, this purpose to create these other external signals of change. And I'm really interested to know, what problems are you in love with that you want to create signals of change for, if that makes sense. So I'm going to stop sharing and go to the chat. What are you in love with today? You want to create positive signals of change that lead us unfold flourishing futures. Again, type in the chat. Is already putting away. Fantastic. The reason why I bring it to the problem part is that when we're in love with what we do as we create solutions, we're always validating the solutions we're creating and evolving to head towards that vision of flourishing futures. It's always checking in that we haven't lost track of what we're solving. And that's really, really important. It's a term we often use in innovation and entrepreneurship. And what it does is ensure that we don't fall in love with a solution, which really goes back to Tom's point. It helps make sure we don't fall in love with a solution which is only good for us, and therefore actually sends out signals which cause problems for other people. That's the history that we've come from, that we want to now shift away from, the past that meant exclusion for so many people. Okay, so Liz has said problem she's in love with, how to replace the normalization of top-down decisions that completely ignore the strengths of people and communities whose problems are being defined and solved from the outside. Absolutely, yeah. And this dropping in and landing, this top-down stuff. Museum, the problem of development agendas that exclude the people affected by these issues. Absolutely. Both of these elements go back to this questionnaire we started with: who's not in the room? Who's not in the room in physically, who's not in the room in terms of our thinking, as humans, as more than human beings. So Tom, problem you're in love with, how to factor long-term communal societal transformation and adaptation in policy and decision making in a contemporary system which prefers short-term individual outcomes. Yeah, absolutely. This short-term, these policy cycles are short. It's about winning favor instead of this deep and long pathway into these futures that we're trying to realize. Dayan, I'm working on international peace and security, so focus on resolving conflicts and humanitarian crises. Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for sharing those. Really powerful. And so thinking of you, kind of, they're the problems you're in love with. And they're big statements that we've got there. And so we want to also, as a signal of change, this metaphor, which means that we're always transmitting this possibility of change through our creativity, through our imagination, through stretching into descriptions of possible futures around these problems, is allowing us to come back to the present moment in order to make different changes happen. But it's also important that we explore our future selves, or we, like, through the lens of our future selves, or from that invitation from our future selves, ensure that we tell the inner story, hold the inner story about who we are through this journey of creating those futures, of being a problem solver in international development. That we believe and we recognize that our creation, our creativity, the signals we create are enough, no matter how small they are, they shift the future, they shift the possibilities. The invitation of nature as a stakeholder into your next meeting, making it routine to do this seemingly strange thing, is a signal of change that you're creating, which sends these ripples out. So as your 2048 self, future self, in a world of clean air that tastes like vanilla cookies, or the smell of petrichor, where the problems that we're experiencing today we have really dealt with, what job title would you give yourself in this future, and why? Okay, so more for the chat. It's important, I think, also when we work in international development, we're often kind of get caught up in trying to solve the whole problem. There's a narrative of passion and purpose, which can also keep us stuck and kind of grind us into the sense of not enoughness. And so it's really important to see impact at the micro level in each day, to know that as we step up as and making a contribution, that's still a valid and valuable part of it. Okay, so I'm intrigued. I find it it's a bit like writing your LinkedIn job description, your LinkedIn blurb at the top. That, wordcraft can take hours, and I'm giving you 30 seconds. And if you're watching this after the event, I still invite you to do this for sure. Okay, so there was typing, and now there's not typing. So Tom's typing something, I can see. Sabina. This is your future self. Future selves is a really powerful element of seeing who you are in this international development, international flourishing future. So Liz is hopefully retired, part of a skills lab that will need to exist to build and maintain the skills we've currently outsourced where I live. Decision making where people have different preferred futures, productive conflict, yes, conflict in collaboration, expanding possibilities, and figuring out how to resource things non-exploitively. Yes, absolutely. Give me a 3-word job title, Liz, for that. But absolutely, the conflict in collaboration. How do we maintain the skills? We have to. It's exactly nailed it. If we've done the job and we've created these flourishing futures, how do we maintain where we're going? Nature abhors a vacuum, so we'll fill it with something, and we want to fill it with more flourishing. So we've got Tom, future generation strategist. Love that. Bringing together climate science, anthropology, and the arts. Gorgeous. To visualize long-term environmental future scenarios. Yes, yes, yes. There's part of me that holds a grief for the me at 18, 19, 20, early 20s, who didn't have university courses that were about sustainability, that didn't have university courses about foresight. It did or wasn't made aware of these things. And I think it's really fantastic, this fusion of futures, foresight with flourishing, with international development, throws open this understanding, this need to bring together culture and biodiversity and science and anthropology to explore and to create these deep stories of our future selves in order that we're magnetized towards them. Research, Sabina, lovely research and implementation coordinator on education policy in Kenya. Fantastic. And there was a brilliant thing I saw this morning, Kenya as Africa's innovation hub. Liz, yes, I know it's early. More coffee for you. Museum, it's going to be teaching international flourishing and facilitating knowledge about how we all keep flourishing. Liz is a roaming elder. I'll join you in the roaming elder thing. A researcher of collaborative peace. Fantastic. So we can come back to this more in a little moment, but it really, yeah, these moments of combining what we did at the start, the time machine, the who's not in the room, the job descriptions, already kind of layering up this memories of the future, memories from the future of what it would be like to be in this world of resolving, of resolution, of collaboration, of collective flourishing and collective commitment towards flourishing. And so in doing that, it changes the prism that we look through about what we need to do in the present. So these are some of the trends. So collections of signals together that are happening in the present that shape futures, that shape our possible futures. So what we do in Foresight is we're looking for these external signals of change that are happening right now, the ones we're creating, the ones we're seeing around us. And we start to group them together into trends, and we can smash different things together. But this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination, but I just wanted to go from you as a signal of change to some of the spaces that you may be working in, some of the trends and multiple trends that you're seeing weaving themselves into the spaces that you're in that are creating possibilities. And I would love, so green transition, just green transition, I would correct that to South-South and regional cooperation. And that actually is this kind of wave of change, which is right and just, coming to change the dynamics of how we think about development, how we think about solutions, how we think about designing with people at a local level, not just with people, but by people at a local level in their spaces, in their communities, in order to problem solve together. So futures in community engagement is this local level, really surfaces those voices and that empowerment. And then it's going together with this sense of how people meet their needs. And I think we mustn't lose sight of that. When we talk about flourishing, it's about really allowing people to meet their needs in ways that are empowering. And then I keep coming back to Tom's point, which is creating the conditions so that there's a shared understanding of what meeting needs in a way that's flourishing looks like for everyone, because that's the dynamic we're in now. It's not the dynamic we're in now. It's the dynamic where people can be spoken to about their needs, but they're being met in disempowering ways that benefit only the few. So what does empowerment look like for women and girls? What does empowerment look like for young men? What does it look like in cities, in rural areas? Where does the digital and the tech fit in. And youth or Gen Z is already saying, okay, we appreciate we have to have these digital skills and they can help us fast track many things and create a good life. But we want these human qualities. We want to be offline. And what does innovation look like in sustainability, in health systems? Those two things go hand in hand. And what about data for development that can come from soil? It can come from the air. But what about how is that extractive? And what about our personal data? And what does it feel like to collect data from a more than human being that we now realize has voice? So these are some of the signals that are systematically and systemically acting on each other. And when we're thinking about them, when we're exploring them, already you can feel maybe the shift between this more logical way of exploring and the need to almost that pull to how do we not get sucked into the lingo and the tracks that we're already on in international development? How can we avoid just perpetuating or extrapolating from the present we're in into a slightly different future, as opposed to a radical shift to end up in the space of flourishing? So there's this term that we use, and why, that's the very reason why it's so important to use the Foresight practice, and create these visions with communities, with ourselves, with our communities, with multi-stakeholders, of what possible futures look like, in order that we not just challenge assumptions and blind spots, but we do so that we avoid creating what we call used futures. And used futures are something that we keep doing, even though it doesn't work, or it did work once, but it's definitely not going to keep working. It's not fit for purpose in the world that we're facing today, with the drivers of change, the big waves of change that we're experiencing, the speed at which change is happening. And so we want to be aware and play with those features in order that we can avoid doing stuff we've done in the myth, perpetuating a myth that doesn't actually work, but also being pulled into what we call disowned futures, which is having to not acknowledge something, not use something, not use a part of ourselves, disown a part of ourselves in order to secure, to be able to fit in to the landscape that is shown to us. And so this brings us into that space of really using foresight and future thinking to create those scenarios, some of which are very difficult, but using it as a safe space to explore extraction and but deliberately seek to be in post-colonial futures. And it's going to create discomfort and it's going to create that conflict in collaboration, but we have to acknowledge the violences that have been perpetuated even within change making, perhaps especially within change making. So it's an invitation to you to be conscious when you're exploring the solutions that you're creating. Going back to Tom's point, is also listening for those used futures that may be there, and really using this discipline to be able to imagine and create and explore beyond that. So Jim Data, who's one of the founders of really the gurus of Foresight, says if an idea doesn't seem ridiculous, then you're not trying hard enough. So we want to be not in the fantastical, but try to be somewhere which is really feels very unfamiliar and allows people to speak up. So the concept of use futures and disown futures is particularly a methodology from Suhail Inayatullah and Ivana Milosevic as other Foresight gurus, and I really encourage you to look at their work of causal-led analysis. So I'm going to kind of wrap up with this question, but then open it and can maybe guide us through a process a little bit. In what does our preferred future in 2048 look like? What do you want it to look like? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but that is the question.